In this lesson, we're going to be looking at some big ideas, some key concepts found in the phenomenology of perception. We're just going to give a basic sketch of these bigger insights from the work, some of which are going to help you while reading the text. Others are things that probably won't come about in your mind, in your head, in your experience until further on, until we've done more reading, until we've unpacked more of these ideas. So we're going to need to fill in these descriptions and these notions with greater detail later in order for them to really make sense, but it's important to give a preliminary sketch of them, and that will help us not only navigate the text as we continue, but anticipate some of those later insights that we'll come to. The first and most important ideas we're going to talk about is the idea of gesture. Gesture is one of the most important ideas from Merleau-Ponty and in the Phenomenology of Perception, as well as in his first book, The Structure of Behavior. Gesture is a type of movement of the body. It's everything from moving around in the world to body language, facial expressions, movements of your hands and things like that. So gesture is an indivisible act. It's something that, you might articulate your hands in a bunch of different movements, but the act is indivisible in the sense that it has one sense to it, that all of those movements combined together. So if you think of like waving to someone, you don't think of this movement and then that movement and then this movement and then that movement as being different gestures. They're all one gesture, even though there's a multiplicity of movements to them. They have one lived relevance, one lived meaning to them that we don't even need to interpret it. We just immediately recognize it in the gesture. It's a way of conveying meaning through bodily action. It's a kind of meaningful action, and we recognize it as meaningful immediately. And even the word recognize, with the cognize as part of its etymology, is a bit misleading because we don't actually have to make an explicit thematic interpretation. We don't actually have to connect it to a concept or anything like that. When you see somebody waving, you just feel its meaning and you live its meaning and you know what it means immediately. So that's a gesture. A gesture is a bodily movement that has significance, has relevance, and is conveyed in a way that is indivisible. So there's a multiplicity of movements, but they appear unified and indivisible. And this is closely related to his idea of behavior. So again, in the structure of behavior, behavior was a major concern of his: physical movement, coordination, things like that. This is, again, really closely related to his idea of motricity and habit body. That's all of these things are naming similar phenomena. But behavior is basically this kind of coordinated gesture, and it's movements which accomplish some common goal. So it's multiple movements. So if you think of like turning a doorknob, you have to like reach out with your hand, then you have to grab with your fingers, and then you have to turn with your wrist. So there's actually a bunch of different movements going on. But when we live that experience, when we do that, when we open a door, we don't actually have to coordinate those movements in any particularly complex way, right? We do it sort of by muscle memory. All of the actions work together simultaneously when we open the door. And we really only have one thought, basically, if we even do have a thought about it. We could do it without even thinking. We just walk up to the door and turn the knob. But if we think about it, I'm going to open this door now. We just accomplish it all in one sort of indivisible act. And behavior has that relation of multiplicity and unity. there's a multiplicity of movements being accomplished by a single intention. So that idea of behavior is what Merleau-Ponty means by motricity. And this is a really important term in the phenomenology of perception. We don't really have this word motricity in English, but it's a French word, and I think it's pretty intuitive as to what it means. It's basically our, ability to get around in the world, our motor capacity to interact with the world and skillfully navigate different situations with our body. It's not just behavior, and it's not just this piloting of movement through varied environments. It's a sort of familiarity with movements, with the world, with our environments. Our motricity is already geared into a complex set of variables in the world which have a significance for us and which have meaning. And so motricity is closely connected to another term of his, which is mobile intentionality or motor intentionality. So a motor intentionality is the way in which our movements, the movements of our body and the way we move our body in order to perceive the world, how they are linked into intentional structures, how they're linked into a way of interacting with the world where we have certain goals and projects. So the habit body is a way in which Merleau-Ponty takes these ideas of gesture, behavior, motricity, and links them up to the lived body, the body that we actually inhabit the world and gear into the world with. It's not a body that is res extensa, like Descartes says. It's not this partes extra partes. It's not a thing laid out in the world as mechanistic physiology describes. It's a lived body, which is always already geared into the world, always already taking up the meaning of the world and interacting with the world in a meaningful way. Merleau-Ponty gets this partially from Henri Bergson, who calls it a body schema. A body schema is the way that the body schematizes the world. It already has a familiarized structure, such that when we see a doorknob, we don't even think, we just immediately know that we can reach out and open it. It invites us to act in that way with respect to it. So that's a body schema. It's not a schema in the Kantian sense where we have certain explicit conscious judgments that we make intellectually, but it functions in much the same way on a more primary level, on a level of perception and the lived body, where we have this kind of a priori relationship to the world in our embodiment, but it's not on this intellectual level of concepts and judgment, but on the level of lived body and movement and what he would call like a motor signification, a motor schema, body schema. So our bodies are habituated to certain actions, and that habituated way of being of our body is like a transcendental structure. It is a transcendental structure which coordinates our motion. It's what makes things appear as relevant. So when we enter a situation, things already appear relevant. Well, that already indicates this transcendental structure that is making sense and ordering the way we move around and interact with things in our environment. So it's coordinating our body and its movement, not only with the environment, but also with itself, so that we can touch our face and things like that, and immediately have this kind of motor or body schematization with respect to all of our different organs and our different appendages and limbs and things. So The habit body schematizes, it organizes and orients all of our multiplicity, our embodied multiplicity. It gives it a kind of unity. But it's a unity which is dynamic and adaptable, in the same way that behavior is adaptable. And it's dynamic in the sense that it involves a lot of perceptions that are in flux. But it also coordinates them and makes sense of them at the most fundamental level of our being in the world. So all of our behaviors are formed by habit and are therefore have a kind of plasticity that allows them to adapt to new conditions. And so the habit body is something that can be thematized by reflective consciousness. We can use our observing consciousness to see that process of habituation and adaptation, that kind of plasticity. But it is not something that is governed by reflective consciousness. It's not dependent on reflective consciousness. It's something that happens much more fundamentally on a level of lived engagement with the world, in the flow of our daily life and our engagement with the world. We habitually act and react to the world in certain ways, and all of that is observable by reflective consciousness, but is not dependent on reflective consciousness. And lastly, I just want to talk about expression. And expression is one of the most important notions in Merleau-Ponty. And his idea of expression is highly nuanced and complex. There are 4 or 5 books out now on the importance of expression. And even beyond that, people who don't write books specifically on expression in Merleau-Ponty, expression still plays a huge part in their understanding of Merleau-Ponty. So expression, as accepted across the scholarship at this point, is one of the most important notions in Merleau-Ponty. And I think it's really one of the most interesting as well, which is always a good thing when the important things are also the interesting ones. So Merleau-Ponty, it could be said, has an ontology of expression, and that's the way a lot of scholarship has put it. Basically, what that means is the expressive act is taken to be fundamental. And so a number of his terms, which we're going to look at, one being style. Style is a really important concept for Merleau-Ponty. Must be understood in terms of expression. And so, in a way, expression is a middle path between the dichotomy between natural and constructed, right? So this is going to be a theme that comes up again and again throughout the course. And it comes from, really from Greek philosophy, Aristotle and Plato. Habit is called second nature. So it's not entirely natural. When we become habituated to something, it's in the realm of custom, tradition, contingent, historical. It's not something necessary. It's something that arises because certain actions were taken that could have not been taken. Nature, on the other hand, is necessary, and it follows certain patterns that happen by necessity. And for the most part, it's really difficult to break the natural chains in Aristotelian and ancient Greek thought. While on the other hand, what is habitual, what is constructed, what is conventional could be otherwise and has no essential nature to it. So this is a major dichotomy in the early Western views of nature. And expression really helps us get outside of that dichotomy. So all natural structures are adapted and in a way constructed. they involve norms which evolve and change based on a multiplicity of factors in the process of the evolution of nature. And on the other hand, every conventional thing, every word, every gesture, every behavior is capable of breaking free from mere biological determinism, and breaks free from the constraints of animal life more generally, even if those aren't completely deterministic. Language and human expression can go even further than the animal life, according to Merleau-Ponty. And we'll talk about the relationship between human and animal a lot more later in the course. I have a quote here from Merleau-Ponty in the Phenomenology of Perception. He says that expression deflects vital behaviors from their direction, their sense, through a sort of escape. And genius for ambiguity that might well serve to define man is this very expressive capacity to escape from this vital necessity. It deflects this vital necessity. So expression is an irrational power that creates and communicates significations, and which speech is merely a particular case. So speech is a type of expression, but expression is much wider than that, and in its most fundamental manifestation, its most fundamental being, is an irrational power that gives birth to signification and communication. And that comes from the Phenomenology of Perception on page 195. And expression, again, as a ontological idea, when I say that Merleau-Ponty has a expressive ontology or an ontology of expression, we can think about that, at least in a provisional sense, as a reversal of the question which Heidegger was concerned with. So Heidegger was concerned with the meaning of being, but Merleau-Ponty flips this and wants to investigate the being of meaning. So the meaning of being or the being of meaning. And, you know, these kind of reversals, they're fun. A lot of times they're, they look more appealing than they actually are. They don't really say much, but I think this reversal is actually really interesting and really revealing for Merleau-Ponty's approach to ontology and philosophy and phenomenology more general. The meaning of being gets us into a whole bunch of questions about being and the word being and our conceptualization of being and the idea of a universal and things like that. But the being of meaning puts all the emphasis on the term meaning. And again, meaning in French is sens. So that's the primary interest of Merleau-Ponty is sense. And sense as sense making, the emergence of sense, that something makes sense, all of that is expressive. And he's going to take the model of artistic expression as being as important, if not more important, than any other type of sense-making experience. And, you know, phenomenology wants to take certain facts of our experience, certain indubitable phenomena, things that happen within our experience that we can't deny. And one of those is going to be the cogito from Descartes, I think. You know, when you experience the fact that you think, you know you exist in that act of thinking, and you know that your existence is a kind of psychical thinking act. So that's really important for Merleau-Ponty. It's one of these primary facts. But that leans into this intellectualist side of consciousness as constituting knowledge through the intellect. And this move towards expression focuses on the side of consciousness that is artistic, that is preconceptual, that is non-thetic. That's another term we're going to come to. All of that points us in the direction of aesthetic experience, of self as an expressive self rather than an intellectual self.